Thanks everyone for joining us today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Marian, and I'm the CEO of Focus Mental Wellness. We're an online therapy company. We provide phone, video, and text therapy Canada-wide. And just thank you so much for being here. I hope everyone's having a good week so far. I'm not sure about anyone else, but I thought it was Thursday. It is in fact only Tuesday. So I hope your week's going by a little bit faster than mine. I am recovering from COVID. So things, I can't really quite figure out exactly what day it is these days, but thanks to being surrounded by wonderful therapists like Marita every day, I'm giving myself some self-compassion on that front. And speaking of Marita, I'm thrilled to introduce her. She's one of our many wonderful therapists on our Focus Therapist Network. And she's also a registered nurse. And so, in terms of burnout, who knows more about burnout than nurses these days? And so we're absolutely thrilled to have her deliver this webinar today. Marita has been providing mental health counseling for over 15 years, and she actually regularly supports clients who are experiencing burnout. And I think given, the past few years and what we've all been through, I wouldn't be all that shocked, and we'll learn here today, but I wouldn't be all that shocked to hear that burnout is a topic that's coming up more and more for therapists and clients as well. And I just can't wait to learn more about this topic given how timely it is, because everyone's talking about burnout. We've all been through so very much, and I'm even more excited to learn about some tips and tricks about how to combat burnout. So I'll pass it over to the expert. Marita, again, thank you so much, and very much looking forward to this webinar today.
Thank you, Marian. And I like to put on my timer so that I don't go off on too many tangents, because I do share a lot of examples as I talk about topics and themes. So, over the last 2.5 years, you've probably heard the term burnout ad nauseum, I would say. I've been hearing the term, I've been a nurse for over 27 years. So I'd say, 10, 15 years, that's been on my radar for personal and professional reasons. So I'm so glad that you made the time, to kind of join the webinar. And, it either tells me that you're thinking that you might be facing burnout, or maybe you're curious. So the approach I take is, prevention is always best. But if you're finding yourself burnt out, well, then the next best thing is to start doing some healing around it. And so I hope that what I'm going to share in the next a little bit gives you, some ideas, some strategies, some, things to ponder and explore after the talk. So I'm really looking forward to sharing with you. Just get to my. Oops. Okay, I'm already having technical difficulties. Sorry about that. I'm trying to get to my next screen and I'm having trouble. It doesn't want to do that. Sorry, Marian.
Maybe you just click. If you just press your space bar.
Let's see. I don't know.
Or scroll down.
Scroll. Oh boy.
Maybe just press escape.
Escape. Huh, it can't be frozen, is it? Just stop the share for a second. I'll share again. I'm sorry about that.
No worries.
Zoom slideshow. Let's see if that. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that.
Perfect. Yeah, no worries.
Ooh. All right. So, in terms of burnout, I think, the last 2.5 years, the focus has been on healthcare professionals, nurses, frontline staff. But, you want to include, regular folks, people that, are at home, looking after their kids, looking after families, maybe looking after older people, loved ones, people that have been on the front lines, teachers, people that are stocking the grocery shelves, anybody that is doing things and might be facing stress as they're doing it. is at risk for burnout. And everybody's different, unique. So something that might burn me out, somebody else might thrive doing it, right? It's all how we approach it, the other stressors that we have in our lives. I look at it as a snowball where, you might have 8 things and it's that 9th thing that kind of pushes you down that hill, and that snowball gets bigger and bigger. So that's one way that I look at it. So my examples might be more inclined about healthcare just because that's my background. But I'll try to give examples of things that I've heard over the last little while that, apply to everybody, not just healthcare providers. So it's sometimes hard to identify burnout. You might be feeling certain things and you don't know what you're feeling, and you don't really label it as burnout. Some people might think like, oh, that's really silly that I think I'm burnt out when so-and-so has so much more on their plate. But everybody's individual. What's stressing you out is important and significant. It doesn't matter if somebody else has something that you think is more stressful. Right. I've had several clients say to me, when I meet with them one-on-one, where they might feel that they're going through something, and then they might say, well, somebody in the Ukraine has it worse than me. Right. And I always point out to them that woman in the Ukraine, right, if that country wasn't at war, they would probably identify with the client that's right in front of me in terms of, yeah, you're facing something really stressful, like the breakup of a relationship, the loss of a job, all of those things are significant. So I always try to help my clients to see that your stress is valid, right? And we don't have to compare it to other people. So in terms of what burnout is, right? Sometimes it's hard to sort of put it on paper, but it's a feeling, you're either feeling it physically, mentally, emotionally, where you're just feeling really, really depleted, really run down. You might have trouble getting out of bed. You might be feeling like, what's the point? Right. And a lot of times people get really alarmed when somebody's like, I can't get out of bed, or I don't see the point in this anymore. Right. And I always say to my clients, those are messages that your body or mind are giving to you. Right. So take notice. And I try to just kind of break it down a little bit, chunk it down so that we're not so overwhelmed. You might be feeling really emotionally drained. It might be you might be going through something really, really stressful that's lasting months and months, and it finally starts to take its toll. Looking after yourself is a necessity. It's not a luxury. I would say that 90% of my clients, really need to hear that, because self-care, that's something that word, we use it so much, that term, self-care, where it gets very diluted. So it's important to put yourself first. And I'll give you some examples of how you can do that, either during a stressful day or stressful period in your life. And it's really important, if you take one thing away from this talk, is that burnout's not your fault. Right. I think with burnout, we get the term resilience. It sort of goes hand in hand. Right. So some clients will say to me, well, if I was more resilient, this wouldn't have happened. Right. Resiliency, we all have it. Right. It's that fight or flight that we have in us. It's a very biological, primitive response, right, when we're running away from danger. So it could be the danger of almost getting into a car accident. Right. Our body knows how to react to that. Right. So yes, we do have resiliency, but when you're in a stressful situation day in, day out for months and months, right, when does that resilience sort of it's like, okay, I've got no more, I've got nothing left in the tank. So I always remind my clients that whatever you're going through, it's not your fault. Right. You couldn't be stronger. You couldn't do more, those kinds of things. So we have to take kind of a step back, kind of assess what's going on, and where can the healing begin? What does the healing look like for you? And what strategies can you put in place so that you're decreasing the chance of burnout or minimizing the effect of it? So some of the words that you might have used for yourself, or you've heard other people use, like fatigue, exhaustion, stressed, like I'm so stressed. How many times have you heard somebody say that, or you've said it yourself, or you've thought it? Feeling depleted, run down emotionally, psychologically, physically, right? A lot of people are getting sick. There's a lot of talk around, adrenal fatigue. What does that mean? What does it mean for women? What does it mean for men? That kind of thing. And the way I look at it, being a nurse, that mind-body connection, you can't be stressed emotionally and not have some sort of impact on your physical body. So other things that I wanted to point out, and my focus is on burnout, but sometimes something else might be at play. So terms like, caregiver burnout, that's usually applied to people that are caring for somebody who's sick in the home, or maybe they're in a nursing home and you're the primary caregiver for that person, or the designated caregiver. So, there is burnout attached to that, in terms of, you're grieving, you're doing some anticipatory grieving around, things have changed. My mom has Alzheimer's, or, I wonder how much longer my dad will be with me. Then compassion fatigue, where if you are in a caregiving role, whether it be personal or professional, where you are caring for people, you're hearing their stories, and that can take a toll on you. Vicarious trauma, right? That can, what does that look like when you're hearing people's stories? And it can feel like you are living through it, even though you haven't experienced it. And then moral distress, moral injury, those are things that at the front line right now, for nurses and doctors, respiratory therapists, where they want to be giving a certain level of care, and for whatever reason they might not be able to, whether it be the workload, or people calling in sick, or they don't have the material that they need to care. I will share a personal experience from quite a few years back, going on probably 8-10 years, where I was working in hospital and I had a full-time job. And at that time we had 2 kids, and our youngest child needed surgery, and he's had various surgeries, and he's totally fine and healthy, but there was an upcoming surgery, and the doctor had said it was going to be a minimum 6-week recovery. So my idea was I was going to take some vacation time and have help from my husband and my mother, and we would cobble it together. And I don't know what I was thinking, but that's what I was thinking. And when I ran it by my then manager, she was like, well, how much time do you think you need? And I said, well, X number of days off. And she's like, oh, could you do less? Could you take like 3 vacation days? I'm like, 3 vacation days? Like, it's going to take him 6 weeks to recover. So I kind of sat with it a little bit. And then sort of as we were approaching the surgery, I'm like, no, actually, I'm going to take I'm going to take an unpaid caregiver leave, 8 weeks, presented it to her, put my application into HR. And I said, like, sorry, like I am doing this, because it was one of those moments where I realized, if I can't care for my own family, what good am I caring for others in a hospital? So I kind of took that break, and 4 weeks in, I realized I'm not going back to my full-time job. I just can't do this. So I signed up for a burnout course, and the woman who taught it was out of UBC, and she is a social worker, and this was on burnout and caregiver compassion fatigue, all these things. So I called up my manager and I said, I'm not coming back. Everybody was happier with me at home. My son was healing really well. And, my manager said, well, would you come back to another unit part-time? And I said, okay, I can do that. But while I was doing this burnout course, and it was for healthcare professionals, and there's a lot of, what's it called? Journals, like journal articles, right? And we were doing a lot of journaling, and these were academic articles we were reading. And what came out of that for me, because I was really worried, because I didn't want to be burnt out, because I loved my job. I loved the work I was doing. It just had so many elements that I really loved, especially my patients. And as I did these questionnaires and did this, sort of a thorough investigation of myself, what came out of it was that I had some vicarious trauma. And when I reflected on that, I was like, yeah, hearing a particular story over and over. And what was happening is clients would say to me, I've never told anybody this. You're the first person I've told. So that was an honor, right? I'm like, oh, you trust me enough to say this. But what they were unpacking was trauma. And I was taking it, and I was sort of holding it. And at that time, I didn't know how to hold it in a way that protected me. And I've since learned how to do that. So, as you're listening, and I've added some resources at the end that you can look at, if it's not burnout, but you're like, hey, I think something's going on with me, keep your eyes open for other things that it might be. And once again, it's not your fault. It doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean you failed. It just means that there's a level of stress for you that, you need to put some of the pieces in place for yourself so that things work better for you. So in terms of work stress and burnout, it can be occasional or chronic. And occasional stress, we're used to that. Most people are used to that in their job, where you've had a busy shift, or it's a busy period. If somebody is an accountant, tax season can be very, very busy, right? Or it can be chronic. And I think what we're seeing in healthcare and for teachers and for different corporations, you're seeing a more chronic, continuous, like every day it's a tough shift, and people don't have time to replenish, right? So it's also when you feel that you don't have power, right? You don't have control over what happens. I know many people where, they have a job, whether they work for somebody or they have their own business, where they're putting in 50, 60 hours and they're not burnt out because they derive a lot of pleasure out of what they're doing. And there's different reasons for that. Some of it is that they do have some control, whether they have control of how many days of the week they're going into the office. Are they working weekends? Do they want to work weekends? Are they responsible for who they hire on their team, right? So if you have some control, it can be really, really helpful. And then also knowing, what is in your control, right? I went to a workshop recently where at the end of the workshop, there was an art therapist that came in and did a group activity. And she gave us a piece of paper and she asked us to scribble with our non-dominant hand. And we did that. Close your eyes. You did this scribble. And she said, okay, take a look, shift it, do whatever you have to do. And she said, if you want to add some more detail, go ahead. So I was like, wow, this is kind of interesting. And then she said, pass it to the person to your right. And everybody was like, what? So passed it to the person on the right. And then she gave us like watercolors, and we had to start to create on somebody else's piece of paper. And it kind of continued this way with different layers added. And when I handed it over to the person sitting next to me, it was like a recognition of, I need to let go. And that letting go, there was such a peace to it. It was almost like when you're floating, on a lake or in the ocean, and you're just so calm and looking up at the sun, right? So, and that's sort of like a visualization. So if you're ever really, really stressed, or even just now, if you like the water, imagine that, a sunny day, you're by a lake or pool or wherever you are, and imagine just floating and that peace that comes with it, right? You're not going to answer your phone. You're not expected to be anywhere, So it was a really nice experience of letting go of things I can't control, right? In terms of burnout, being overworked, maybe doing overtime and you don't want to, but you feel obligated. Also, if something stressful is going on, do you have the supports in place at your place of employment where you can talk about it? Are there people there that you trust? Having worked in hospital for many, many years, usually on mental health units, right? When there was, code white, somebody is having difficulty where, people have to come in, and whether it be a physical restraint or chemical restraint, after that, there should be a debrief. And I can't tell you how many times I was part of a code white, and then I wasn't able to talk to anybody. So I had to process that on my own, right? And it's always best if you can process with others, right? Like, did we do this okay? Is the patient okay? All that stuff, right? And you find that anywhere. My dad is a retired engineer. He had issues go on in the buildings that he looked after, where sometimes things happened where, there wasn't an opportunity to talk. And had he been able to talk, let's say, he might not have been as stressed when he got home and worried about, his job and coworkers and all that. And it's really important to try to find a balance and managing your stress. So, I'll go over some strategies that might be helpful. So signs and symptoms that you might be burnt out, having some anxiety, or symptoms similar. It doesn't mean that you're going to get a diagnosis of anxiety or depression, but you might be feeling it, right? And for some people, they feel it physically, right? Clients will say to me, like, I've got butterflies in my stomach, my chest feels tight, my hands feel sweaty, I feel dizzy. Those are the kinds of things. Some people, they have a history of that type of thing, and others will say it's new to me. Feeling tired, run down. And when I ask clients about sleep, right, it's not just the quantity, but it's the quality, right? So some clients will say, I get 6 hours, I feel refreshed in the morning. Other clients will say, I think I slept 10 hours, but I feel really tired. I tossed and turned. I got up 3 or 4 times. So looking at your sleep, and has there been a change in your sleep? Becoming irritable, overreacting. So I don't know, let's say you're making your coffee and you're reaching for cream or milk in the fridge, and you realize, like, oh, we've run out. And normally you'd be like, oh, okay, I'll just drink it black, or I'll get a coffee when I get to work. But maybe if you're facing burnout, it's a huge deal. And you start storming around and like, oh, this sucks. And this always happens to me, and that kind of thing. In terms of that mind body connection, when somebody is really burnt out, they might get sick more often, right? With, respiratory infections, stomach stuff, aches and pains, stiff neck, all that kind of stuff, trouble concentrating, headaches, losing, say, the purpose with your job, right? Maybe not being as satisfied, right? Maybe it was something that you really, really enjoyed, and now you're like, not really feeling it anymore, right? Not wanting to participate in things that you normally like if somebody plays a musical instrument, some people are in a band, some people go hiking with friends, or they were part of a hiking group. And, say it's Saturday, it's your day off, and you're like, oh, what's the point? I really don't feel like it. Right? That could be a sign that you're facing burnout. So unhealthy coping. So when I meet with my clients, I always ask them, like, what coping strategies are you using, and are they working for you? And so it's something like, oh, I try to meditate, that kind of thing, yoga, because those things are so popular now, right? And then I ask them, is there anything that you think is unhealthy coping? And that's when they might share, like, yep, I smoke marijuana. Sometimes I drink too much. I've taken up smoking again. I've been doing some binge eating, shopping when I don't need to buy something, right? And maybe drinking too much or too often, right? And so what I like to point out with clients is, when you reach out for that unhealthy substance or coping strategy, right? The fact that you are seeking it out is actually a strength, because you know that you need to do something. So I never diminish that. And I never say to a client, look, you've got a problem. Look, you should quit. Never. It has to come from the client to say, like, I want to reduce this. I think this might be an issue for me. And then we start to explore it. And I'm always, the self-compassion is very important. There's no reason to be harsh, right? I think we all have that harsh inner critic that comes out. I don't know if I've ever met anybody that has a really, really loving inner critic, unless they've done a lot of work around it. So if a client says to me, like, yeah, I'm smoking a pack a day, but I had quit this and that, the first thing is that self-compassion, that if you're going to look at quitting, the self-compassion is critical in my mind and how I work. So in terms of preventing or coping with burnout, gratitude, I go very gently with gratitude, right? I do believe in gratitude journaling and all that stuff. I've actually created a gratitude journal that I share with clients and with nurses, but it's just one piece. I would say maybe it's 1/10 of how it kind of falls into a self-care practice. Because I think what happens is, when somebody suggests, oh, you should practice gratitude, right? I think the message we receive is, well, if I was more grateful, I wouldn't be feeling this way, right? And when things are going really, really well, and work is not difficult, and there isn't a worldwide pandemic, maybe gratitude is all somebody needs. But when life is really hard, right? And it's hard to get out of bed, and it's hard to get in the shower, and it's hard to find that, like, hey, I used to love my job, or I used to love hanging out with my friends, saying to somebody like, oh, you should just, pick up a gratitude journal. It falls really, really short. I actually had this happen with a client, that when I suggested journaling, she fired me, right? And I guess I hadn't done a good enough job in saying to her, it's one of several pieces, right? And we had already built and some pieces for her, and I guess they weren't meeting the mark. So then I said, how about this? And she's like, no, I'm done. She's like, I could just go to the bookstore and buy a book rather than listen to your suggestions. So I had to do some reflection in terms of how I deliver my information. And so that's why I deliver it this way, where it's one piece. I do encourage clients that at the end of the day to notice, like, what went well, what was a small win, and for some clients, it is taking that shower. That is huge. I've got very, very curly hair. And I don't know if you've seen memes around, curly hair problems where washing your hair can take a lot of energy. And some days I'm not feeling it. Does that mean I'm burnt out? Maybe, maybe not. But you're looking at the whole picture, right? Making time to rest and recharging, right? And that when I think of that, my husband and I, we had a cottage. We have since sold it, but my parents would come to the cottage. And, in the summer, I would spend most of the time at the cottage and my husband would commute. And my parents would come and they would plan to spend the night, like one night. And they would fall asleep within 10 minutes of getting on the deck. And we would take photos because the kids thought it was funny because my parents worked hard all their lives. So they would fall asleep within 10 minutes. And then the next day, they would appear like they had been on vacation for 2 weeks. And they're like, okay, we're good to go. And my husband and I would be like, you're good to go. And they were recharged and rested and ready for their week, right? For myself, I would need a good week of rest and recharging to look the way my parents did the next day, right? So when you're thinking of like, what can I do to come out of this or make it better, right? What will work for you will look different than what works for somebody else. And that accepting that you can't control everything, right? Some people will say like, let be and let God. I don't practice from that way unless a client says to me like, look, I practice a religion and they want to incorporate that, right? But that letting go, like the keep calm and carry on, like I'm sure you've seen that on notebooks and things like that. It's that idea because we can't control everything, right? If somebody suffers from anxiety, and I shouldn't say suffer because the way I practice anxiety, there's benefits to it, right? But if somebody has that anxiety, that sense of wanting to control really helps, right? But it actually doesn't because we're chasing something and we just can't keep up with that, right? So, but if there are things you can control, like your schedule, like if you can say to your manager, look, I want to work 4 days in the office, 1 day at home, right? And it gives you that sense of control, it can help. And that's where, focusing on the things that you can control. Can you control what time you go in the morning to offset, say, if there's traffic? If you're working from home, can you control how many Zoom meetings you're having? Can you log off early on a Friday? Can you work Sunday if you want to and take Tuesday off? Those are things that can help. And also knowing when it's okay to say no. No is a complete sentence, right? So a lot of clients, we do a lot of work around assertiveness and boundaries with family, with work, with relationships, all that stuff. Staying connected with people is really, really important. Some clients, like with the pandemic, some people, with the lockdowns, it's harder to get out. I had somebody say to me yesterday that she was at a party and it was outside. And she said nobody wanted to leave because it had been so long since they had gotten together. And she said it was so good to see people. And it was her first time going to a party in over 2 years. So what I'll say to clients that have trouble getting out there is I'll say, just send a text to a friend and say, hey, I was thinking about you. Right. And we sort of negotiate what that text would look like. Is it awkward? Which friend can you do that with? Which family member? And they sort of set it as a goal or as homework. And then we sort of leave it like, send that text, right? And then see where it goes, right? So I had one client do that. And then it led to like, oh, we're getting together for coffee. Oh, we're getting together for a walk. Oh, we're going to go to the movies. So it sort of just built very, very nicely with the one friend. And then she's like, okay, I'm going to reach out to a second friend. And that can really help when you're feeling stressed and burnt out. So like I mentioned, in terms of boundaries, knowing your limits, right? So if somebody says, can you do this? Can you do that? If you really can't, it's okay to say, I actually can't do it. I can't do it this week, but maybe I can do it in 2 weeks' time, right? And you don't have to explain, right? It's just doing a check-in, right? I know for myself, I see X number of clients a week. I have recently said to some clients, I actually have a waiting list. I have a waiting list into the fall, right? Could I take them? No, honestly, I couldn't because I wouldn't be able to give them what I want to give. And it wouldn't be good for me. It wouldn't be good for my family, right? So can you set boundaries like that in your personal life and your professional life? And, like I said, celebrating the small wins and knowing that what you're doing is making a difference, right? And it might not be how you want to do it, but it's what you can do right now. it's important to reach out and talk to somebody that you trust. Sometimes that'll be, a therapist, your doctor, who do you trust that you can talk to? And sometimes it'll be your best friend or your cousin or your mother. For me, my whole entire nursing career, it's been my mother, right? My husband came on the scene later, but I had already been a nurse when I met him. And my mom is my go-to person. So after a night shift, the kids go off to school. When I was working night shifts, and I would call my mom, and while I was having a cup of tea or whatever I was doing, I would talk to her. I mean, I wouldn't give client details, but I would talk to her about how I was feeling. And that has probably helped with my burnout. Oh my goodness, it probably cut it down about 50%. And she's not a nurse. She worked in a hospital. She gets it. She gets me. So that was my person. So it's really, really important. Some clients will say to me, I'm afraid that I'm going to be a burden to my friend. Right. And I always say to them, like, look, if your friend asked you how you're doing, they want to know. Right. And I have had clients where friends will say, like, look, that's too much for me. Right. So that tells me that their friend has a good boundary. Right. And that's what we're taught to say. Right. If somebody wants to tell you something, right, you say, you know what, I actually don't have time today, but I could talk to you next Monday. Right. And it's okay to give those boundaries. I have a friend that she reached out to me last week. I was too busy. So I said, I'm sorry, this is what's going on with our life, but can I book a time on Monday? Right. And that's okay. We don't have to attach guilt to that. A lot of times we attach guilt. But if a friend wants to know, if a friend says, let's go for coffee, it's okay to share and not feel that you're being a burden. Right. And it's that give and take. Sometimes you'll be there for your friend and sometimes they will be there for you. And making time for things that bring you joy. I was at my parents' place a few weeks ago, and my parents had been at a wedding, and my mom got a very, very big bouquet that had been on the table. And it was huge. I'm like, this is huge. Like it's, and she said, I know. So she took 3 vases and she started to break up this bouquet. And it took her about an hour. And she's got this green thumb. She loves the garden. And I watched her, and she derived such pleasure from that, of making these 3 bouquets. 1 came home with me and 2 she put elsewhere. And I know that for her stress reliever when she worked, she was very stressed. She had a lot on her plate all the time, was to get her hands in the soil, in the earth. And she would say that to me. She would say, you've got to get your hands in the earth, when I was super stressed about stuff. And I would like, no, I don't want to. I don't have a green thumb. Our oldest daughter does. But for some people, and if you're listening and you're one of those people, get your hands in the earth. If you love flowers, if you love plants, that can be a really effective coping strategy. I have a friend who's a nurse, and she calls herself the nature nurse. She's in the States, and she does this, I think it's a walking kind of therapeutic thing that she does. And that's her thing. She encourages nurses to get into nature, and other people, you don't have to be a nurse to do the stuff that she does. So if that's calling you, get your hands in the earth. Not my cup of tea. It will never be. And I've had to come to peace with that. Right. And also spending some time checking in with yourself. What is it that speaks to you? My very favorite thing with our youngest child is to color. There is nothing like the smell of a Crayola crayon. I just like, that's like the fanciest perfume in my mind. And I love that smell. And it immediately calms me down, because I get centered and grounded. Before this call, I was talking to Marion, and I had to center and ground myself, because that child, the one I'm talking about, she's sick, and she's got allergies, a cold, and an eye infection, right? We knew about the allergies, and this stuff sort of added up. And I'm like, really? The day that I'm doing a presentation on burnout, she's not feeling well. So, we all have it from time to time, right? And sometimes it hits us harder than other times. And I'm going to remind you again about that self-compassion, right? So as you're listening, if any of this stands out for you, where it's like, yeah, I could do that. I could do a little bit of that. And you don't need to have 10 things in your toolkit, right? Your stress relief toolkit, 1 or 2 things that you're very passionate about, right? So if you are a gardener and you have a trusted person that you can speak to, those are 2 things that can help you if you're on that road to burnout, or if you're looking to prevent it. So in terms of exercise, there is a somatic practitioner that I really love listening to on YouTube, and she swears by very intense aerobic activity where you're sweating, right? And some people, that's what they need, what their nervous system needs. Others, it's that gentle movement, stretching, yoga. whatever it is, right? And even if I was saying to Marion, like we've all had COVID, and my husband used to go to the gym just recently to the gym with my son post COVID, he can't even do 10 minutes on the treadmill. And he can't do weights because he immediately gets very fatigued and chest pain. So he has to listen to his body. Otherwise, he's wiped out for a couple of days, right? So finding what works for you, even if it's just, I'm going to go around the block twice, right? And that's okay. Even just touching your toes or trying to touch your toes, seated yoga, right? It will make a difference in terms of the mind body, the endorphins, whatever needs to happen in your body, right? Finding time to laugh. I try to incorporate humor in my therapeutic sessions if the client is open to that. I know that in the past, like when my husband and I have faced really, really stressful things in our life where, humor has gotten us through it. In terms of relaxation, I mentioned that visualization of being by the lake or the ocean and floating, right? So just closing your eyes and envisioning your favorite place. For me, it's like the fall colors by the lake up north. I'm in Ontario. For other people, it might be some hot yoga, right? I have a friend that loves hot yoga, right? So that's her relaxation. In terms of nutrition, there's a lot of people are reaching out for the sugary, starchy foods because when we were in lockdown, right, that fear of like, what's going on? What's going to happen? I think it was really, really a normal thing to reach out for that comfort food. And now people are like, okay, I kind of want to do something about this, right? So, having healthier snacks like fruit, vegetables, leaner meats, healthy fats, all that. And it's been shown that your diet does affect your mood, right? So maybe taking a look at what are you eating, when, how, that kind of thing. Looking at your caffeine and how much you're drinking, right? Some people will drink 3-4 cups, right? And it doesn't seem to affect them. Other people, 1 cup and that's enough for them. And some don't drink at all in terms of caffeine. Alcohol, take a look at how much you're drinking, when, making time for sleep, and looking at, is your sleep environment, is it conducive to good sleep, right? Are the blinds dark enough? Is it cool? Do you need white noise? Checking in with your MD, with your doctor. I've said that to clients this past week. I've asked a couple clients, when was the last time you had blood work? Because some of the things they were saying, I don't know what the fatigue is. Is it depression? And I don't diagnose. As a nurse, I don't diagnose. And the only person that can do that is their doctor, right? Do you need blood work? Are you anemic? Do you need an iron pill? All that stuff. And when you have some of those physical diagnoses, it can impact your mood. Reaching out to talk to somebody, as Marion said, there, we've got countless therapists at Focus that are trained to deal with stress, coping, anxiety, burnout, all that stuff. And if you're having thoughts of self-harm or suicide, like this isn't worth it, those kind of thoughts, I really, I can't stress enough to call 911, call a crisis line, reach out to a friend, because this is serious, right? If the burnout has gotten to that point where you're feeling that life is really, really hard, I really can't stress enough to reach out for some help. In terms of types of rest, right? Because sometimes people don't sleep a lot, but rest can be, I look at it like it's the second best thing. So, a physical, so just resting your body, so sometimes just closing your eyes for a moment and quieting everything down, in terms of quieting your mind. I mentioned connecting with nature, or if you're a spiritual or religious person, connecting to that spiritual side of yourself. Sensory. I know with my son, he loves rap music and all sorts of other music. So if he plays it for me in the car, I always say to him, can you lower that? And he's like, but it's not loud. I'm like, it's loud for me. And that's my sensory, right? Like when I'm driving, that kind of music, I can't listen to it loud. So just looking at the things that might be, affecting you in terms of your senses. Do you need to dim the lights? Do you need to open a window so that you can feel a breeze, right? Creating something. Like I mentioned about my mother with her vase of flowers and things like that. And emotional, just feeling your feelings and being able to express them, right? So expressing them, like, I don't know, writing a poem or listening to some music and dancing, whatever feels right and good for you. So I wanted to just quickly, if you're not doing any deep breathing or any breathing, I just wanted to do a couple quick ones and I used to do this when I worked in the hospital. I would do this in the medication room, in between clients as I was getting medication or doing vital signs, where I would just focus on my breath. And my son has told me that he does this before bed to get him to a deeper sleep, where you'll breathe in for 4, right? Or whatever's comfortable. If you want to breathe in for 6 or 8, so you breathe in for 4, you hold it for 4, and then you release for 4, and then you just keep doing it as many times as you want to. I find doing it a couple times, that was enough for me just to get to a place of calm, so that I wouldn't be, running around like a chicken with my head cut off. Because a lot of times shifts at the hospital would be like that, where you'd be getting phone calls, the pharmacist wants to speak to you, and somebody's family member wants to speak to you, and all that stuff, right? And wherever you're working, you might have days like that where you just kind of want to quiet everything down and prioritize. And in terms of a grounding technique that I do with clients, sometimes I'll get a client, and most of my work is on Zoom, where they'll get on the call, and I can tell right away that something is wrong. So we just quickly do a grounding technique where I'll say, okay, let's just take a moment, let's take a breath, and I'll just tell them, like, notice your feet on the ground, right? I'll say, you're okay, you're safe, and you can say this to yourself: you're safe, nothing bad's going to happen right now. Your feet are on the ground. Gravity's going to hold you in place. Then are you on a chair? Are you on a couch? Notice the back of your thighs or your butt on the chair, right? And then clients will say, like, oh, my butt's so big, or, it's not about that. It's not about that. It's about being grounded to, you're not going to fall over. You're safe. Take a look around. What do you see? For me, I have a big window in front of me so I can see the leaves. I like to see them moving, right? That really grounds me. And then I ask my clients to rub their hands together, right? And that sensation, sometimes even the sound, right? And just telling yourself, I'm okay, right? And that touch can be very soothing, right? Rubbing your arms as well, if you need to, right? Just that caress, right? And just bringing yourself to a place of calm, right? And you can do that in the car, right? If you're not driving, red light. I used to do a grounding technique before I went into the hospital. I recently heard he's a hypnotist, and he does that kind of grounding. He teaches healthcare professionals as they're leaving the hospital, right, to just rub your hands together, right? So whatever happened at your place of employment, right, just, it's okay, right? And you're trying to just release it so that you're not carrying it. So I've given you some resources. One is on tapping for burnout. It's a link to a YouTube video. It's very short, I think about 8 minutes. And it uses pressure points. So it's sort of like acupuncture without the needles, right? And you're doing it to yourself. And it's like part of the hand. So the karate chop, it's called, timer. And it'll walk you through, right? You're just tapping different parts of the face. And if I had more time, I could walk you through it. But it's worth taking a look. I find tapping really, really beneficial. I do it for myself if I feel a migraine coming on, or if I'm feeling overwhelmed. And I find that as soon as I start tapping on this part, right, this is called the karate chop, immediately, because I've been doing it for so long, I just come down from wherever my mind thought it was going to go, right? I've included a questionnaire that you can take a look at that can give you a sense of where you're at in terms of stress, in terms of quality of life, that kind of thing, and a couple of articles on burnout to give you, a little bit more information. So I hope that this was helpful. My last slide has some info about Focus if you want to reach out and talk to somebody. But it's been a pleasure. Burnout, it's here for many of us. And if you just took one small thing about that self-compassion, I wish you well on your journey.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marita. Honestly, I just can't tell you how privileged I feel to be, surrounded by wonderful therapists like you. And I think, to take an hour this afternoon and to talk about this really important topic that we seem to be, as you said, sort of bombarded with, and really truly learn about what actually burnout is, because it's a collection of things, right? It's not just one. It's not just like anxiety. It's such a complicated topic and could be caused by so many different aspects. And so it was wonderful to learn about that today. I'd encourage everyone to just take a few minutes, as Marita suggested, to do something that brings you joy. You mentioned, Marita, even just walking around the block twice. And actually, I'm going to do that right after I get off this call before my next call. So you've inspired me to take a moment for myself. I encourage everyone else to do so. We will be sharing the slide deck for those of you who have registered. So look out for that. And otherwise, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thanks again, Marita. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your week. Take
Thanks,
care.
Marian. Thank you.